Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. Check out this intro and tell me what you think about it.
Welcome to the dissection. Welcome to the dissection.
What do you think? I've been getting comments on the intro from the previous episode where I tested the intro. Let me know what you think. Today, we have breaking news. And the breaking news is that President Ramaphosa has given the full go-ahead for the implementation of the BELA Act. There are no changes that have been made to the act. All of the clauses remain intact. This BELA Act has occupied the media attention and the political attention of the Democratic Alliance. It's a big deal to them, to education, and now the president has finally made a move, and he has effectively ignored everything that the Democratic Alliance, Afriforum, Solidarity raised and gone full steam ahead with the version of the act which was already signed on September the 13th. Delays and delays and delays. This is the 20th of December. This was all supposed to be resolved on the 13th of December, but 7 days later in the day at about 5 p.m., the announcement was made that the BELA bill is going ahead. Now, this fight is about more than the BELA Act in and of itself. Why was it significant in the first place? It's important for us to unpack that, to show why. In as much as it's about education, it's not about education, it's about the future of the government of national unity, the modus operandi of the government of national unity, and the balance of power within the government of national unity. That's what the brand that was chosen to name this DA and ANC coalition. So why did this battle matter? One, it mattered because the Democratic Alliance threatened to leave the coalition as a result of any implementation or signing of the BELA bill in its original format. Helen Zille made those threats, John Steenhuisen made those threats, and they then made this a red line issue. They said, here's a red line. If you implement this, if we lose, this single medium type of education in these particular schools, we are walking away from the government of national unity. They say that several times. That's the first reason why this battle mattered. The second reason is that the Democratic Alliance was trying to find alternative ways of creating policy and influence within the coalition government. And fundamentally, what they tried to then do was they said, we don't want to work with Paul Mashatile. We don't want to work within the clearinghouse mechanism because that will give the final say on issues to Paul Mashatile, the Deputy President of South Africa and the Deputy President of the ANC. Someone who we don't want to give more status, more respect, more prestige, and even acknowledge his authority. So what they did in this instance, they said to their protest partners who were protesting this bill, right? Because they have coalition partners and they have protest partners. So in this case, the Solidarity, which is a workers' union, an Afrikaans workers' union, was told, lodge a formal complaint at NEDLAC, and then the minister will come in as the Minister of Basic Education, Siviwe Gwarube, and she will then mediate and talk to you guys in that platform. We will then keep out the ANC. The presidency will be involved because the presidency signs the act. The DA will be involved because the minister is the person who will be negotiating with you on behalf of government and as well as your workers' union. Then the three of you, without the ANC, without the clearinghouse, without the SATU, which is a teachers' union, will really be able to get to the bottom of this because SATU cannot just get into this issue. This is what was done. And the DA came to the public and said, hey, we've made a deal at NEDLAC. This is what's going to happen. The minister is going to recommend suspension of these provisions for as much of a time as necessary till we get norms, regulations, and a bunch of other things which the DA said they needed so that they can dilute the effect of the bill. So this particular sidestep of the clearinghouse and whether or not it would be successful, because it would then mean in future what the DA can do if there's a dispute maybe on NHI is follow the same blueprint, right? To say, come to this particular forum, you'll deal with the minister, and you'll avoid dealing with the ANC guys, we'll deal with the presidency directly, and we'll get the recommendations or the implementations that we want. So this is what they were trying, and this particular strategy then gets tested here. The other reason why it mattered is because the DA has been trying to re-establish their role within the coalition, not as a passenger sitting in VIP, but as a co-pilot. They want to be in the captain's cockpit. They want to be in the driving seat, directing where the country goes. And they've felt for a very long time that the ANC has worked in various ways to dilute their presence in the coalition. So for instance, on the day that the president was elected by parliament, the DA and the ANC were really the main players within the coalition. After the president was elected, the ANC then added also other coalition partners and basically broadened the coalition so that it doesn't look so much like a DA and ANC coalition. There were concerns and appreciation from the presidency and leaders within the ANC that the more it looks like ANC DA, there are going to be many people within the ANC grassroots who will say, we sold out. These people are our rivals, our enemies, people who've maligned us, demonized us, and even wrote in their manifesto that we have been the biggest problem in South Africa for 30 years. So why would we do a deal with our enemy? So the way that you kind of camouflage that is that you add a bunch of people, you add Rise Mzansi, Patriotic Alliance, you add as many people as you can. Freedom Front Plus was added. And what you then do is then you now have 10 people within the coalition. The DA can no longer claim that they have a special position within that coalition. And they've been trying to reclaim that and say, listen, no, we actually have a veto. This is what the statement of intent said, etc. And we've seen those fights play out. They were writing letters to each other in the media, doing interviews with Clement Manyatela and a variety of platforms, trying to argue who's got a proper understanding or interpretation. Going to where we are now as the year is ending, we're getting clarity on how the ANC is going to deal with the DA's role, and this is why it also has mattered. It gives us an understanding of what comrades and cadres will call a balance of forces, balance of power. You need to know where's the power balancing, right? So we know that. So the fourth thing is that the DA has been trying to use the factional divisions within the ANC or their perceptions or strategic interpretations of the divisions within the ANC to try to divide and rule the ANC, right? To say, okay, if we then, position Paul Mashatile, Panyaza Lesufi on this side, and we position Fikile Mbalula and others on this side, and then we then say this one is the Doomsday faction, and this one is the Sunny Day faction, and then if we have the Sunny Day faction with the DA faction, then we kill the Doomsday faction, then we're not going to see MK and EFF coming in via the back door, etc., etc. So they've picked strategic fights with Panyaza Lesufi and others to try to use this divide and rule strategy. And now we are getting to see whether or not it has worked. So what have we learned? What do we learn from this particular situation? First thing, you can learn a lot by watching who's celebrating and how they're celebrating. So Panyaza Lesufi, for instance, is celebrating. He posted on his Twitter, he's a picture of him with the president smiling, hugging, all of that. So he's celebrating. He won. Body language tells you everything. The Health and Education Subcommittee of the ANC and its members, they've won this debate. They've won. They got every piece of the legislation that they wanted to fully be enacted as law. Game over. It is the law. It hasn't been amended. They've won. Panyaza Lesufi has won the argument, as well as Paul Mashatile has won the issue of power. The issue of power is, where does the issue get resolved? Is it NEDLEC or is it the clearinghouse? The clearinghouse is the measure that will be used. The DA has basically been told, which is to say, we said clearinghouse is the avenue. Paul Mashatile is in charge of the clearinghouse. you go through Paul Mashatile, do or die, it is what it is, that's what you're going to do. So the Clearinghouse version 1. Number 2, President Ramaphosa did try to give them a way out, a little something, if you will, right? Because he says the Minister of Basic Education will implement the bill. Obviously, the implementation requires there to be, norms, regulations, etc. But this was never really in question. It's moot. Whatever law is passed, the relevant minister still has to be responsible for the implementation of that law. That's a moot question. The question really was, is the act going to be amended? That was the question, because Afriforum, Solidarity, all of these entities wanted amendments. They didn't want more clarification around how this will all work. They wanted changes. They wanted removal of these particular provisions. They did not want the head of department to have the final say on language and school admissions policy within a particular district, city, whatever. That responsibility, the power, rests with the head of department. They have the final say. In Zulu, we say, "Kalisicathulo sika HOD." Kalisicathulo means the shoe that cries, or rather the final word, the final say, if you will. Because it's Zula story for that reason. They say you don't translate idioms and sayings because you lose a lot in the translation. But fundamentally, the final say is the say of the head of department, exactly what the school governing bodies do not want. By the way, this whole fight goes back to the late 2000s, where there was a school in Mpumalanga called Emelo, which refused to become a dual medium school, even though the school had only 500 students, a capacity of 1,200, and all the other schools in the surrounding areas had over 1,000 students. One of the schools had a class average size of 65, and the other schools were English medium schools. So what the department had asked was like, hey, Emelo, can you guys become a dual medium school so that we can reduce the burden? Because you're all government schools. And then that Afrikaans high school, which has been in existence for over 100 years, said, no, we can't do that. What we're going to do is offer you this disused laundry that these English learners can use if they don't have capacity. But they're going to be enrolled at another school. They're not going to be part of our school. And then you can have some teachers teach them in English there, but we're not going to become dual medium. The head of department was frustrated by the school governing body and then brought learners to the school, about 70 learners in 2007, and said, enroll these kids in and teach them in English. Then the school governing body said, no, we're not going to do that. You're crazy. We're not going to do that. Then the head of department then said, okay, fine. I'm dissolving this school governing body and I'm appointing an interim school governing body. What they then did, that interim body then said, okay, we're changing the language and admission policy of this high school. That issue was taken all the way to the Concord, and the Concord ruled in favor of the school, but not in favor of the issue. They ruled in favor of the school because they said, listen, the way that the head of department did this was not in line with administrative law, because you can't do one decision with a purpose of achieving another decision. And fundamentally, he abused the rules that existed and the powers that existed, because he just changed the school governing body to change the language policy, and that's not in line with administrative law. So that's the history of the case. It comes from these scenarios where neighborhoods are changing, neighborhoods which are suburbs which were predominantly Afrikaans, and these schools had been maybe founded even before the apartheid regime, but really got a lot of funding during the apartheid regime from the Bantu Education Act, and then became, all access schools, or were supposed to be all access schools, but then were able to exclude many people merely on the basis of that they're Afrikaans schools. And some people don't want to learn in Afrikaans for a variety of reasons. Some people are not proficient. It takes a lot of time to get proficient, particularly at a high school level in a language. So dual medium really is the way that you become inclusive in suburbs that are diversifying, suburbs which may have been, predominantly Afrikaans suburbs in 1972, but now are becoming predominantly English speaking in a variety of ways. That could be because there's more Indians, there's more black people, there's more, European type of people outside of, Dutch. And then also that, the Afrikaans population, some of them may have moved to Cape Town, some of them may have emigrated. who knows the reasons, but if an area has become diversified, the public schools in that area have to become more accommodating. So even though he gave them something in that, something that they can spin, really, it was never about that. So the other thing that we learn is that the DA is not going to be a co-pilot. They're not going to be a co-pilot. They're going to be a VIP in the first class of this plane called Government of National Unity. That's what we are learning here. They're not going to fly the plane. They're not going to determine the route. And this is also why the president signed some of these acts in advance. The ANC knew what the polling was saying. They were presenting a very confident approach when they were speaking to the public. But they knew that, listen, we don't have the numbers. And if we suspend BELA, NHI, any other things that we want to enact, we won't be able to do so after. So in the last 3 to 4 months of the Ramaphosa presidency in the previous administration, he signed a whole bunch of legislation, right, into effect, because they knew that it's better to defend something which is now at the try line than to start the whole play again. I hope my rugby reference makes sense. I'm not too much of a rugby fan, but you kick the ball as close to the try line as possible, then you try to get your try. So the try, obviously, here is just implementation. But if you still have a draft, etc., what could happen is that those particular provisions can then get frustrated in the next administration. That's why President Ramaphosa signed a lot. The DA cares about a lot of those bills that were signed into act in the twilight, if you will, of the last Ramaphosa administration. But there's nothing that they can do at this particular point. And the ANC is showing how they're going to deal with the DA going forward. So Helen Zille and the DA have reacted to this particular issue. Here's what she had to say.
Read carefully because there are two parts to it. One is that the BELA Act will be implemented in its entirety. The other part is that Siviwe Gwachube, the Minister of Basic Education, first has to draw up norms, standards, and regulations to govern the implementation of the contentious sections. That is Section 4, D, E, and F, and Section 5A and C. So the President has signed the entire Act into law, and we're aware of that, and that was an agreement that came out of the clearinghouse mechanism and out of the task team that reports to the clearinghouse mechanism. But the important point is that Minister Siviwe Gwachube gets to ensure that the norms, standards, and regulations are there before those sections are implemented.
And I was in conversation with Sato a little earlier on, and I brought this point to them. And Nomusa was saying that for her, it's not a big deal because everything should be there in any case, and it doesn't mean that there'll be some delays. Is that your understanding as well?
There will be some delays, obviously, because of the fact that it takes time to formulate norms and standards and regulations. It takes a lot of time. There's a legal process that you have to go through. It involves public participation. It involves a whole range of issues. So Siviwe Gwachube will go through the legal process properly, step by step, and will get those norms, standards, and regulations in place so that the contentious aspects of the bill can be implemented within that framework.
So did the clearinghouse agree on how much time this could take?
No, they didn't. Not at all. It normally takes about 18 months to finalize these norms and standards and regulations following the process as it's intended to be followed in law.
So you had expressed some concerns, of course, about this particular bill, even, campaigning during the elections, but also afterwards and in recent times as well, also speaking about the issue of Afrikaans, for example, and looking at the president's statement, he says that every person has the right to receive education in their official language and their language of the choice where reasonably practicable. And he then lists, of course, the number of languages. They have those concerns for you been addressed?
Well, PANSALB has existed for close on 30 years, and the question to ask is, what have they done in terms of their mandate to make mother tongue education accessible to more and more children. The Afrikaans community has done a lot to ensure mother tongue education for their children. The deaf community has done an enormous amount to ensure that sign language instruction can be given and that they can learn all their subjects through the medium of sign language so that it becomes a language of instruction. The question is, what has happened with the other languages? They've been totally neglected by PanSALB, and that is where the focus now needs to be.
So what does that mean then? Does it mean it's not over for the Democratic Alliance on this particular issue?
Well, nothing is ever over. I mean, we will continue to fight for democracy and for the Constitution forever. And the bottom line is that we agreed in the clearinghouse mechanism, in the task team that reported to the clearinghouse mechanism, we agreed that eventually the full BELA Act will be implemented. When the norms, standards and regulations governing sections 4, D, E and F and 5A and C are in place. So that is the agreement.
So Helen, can I then maybe say, just tell me if I'm interpreting your position correctly here. You are saying we're backing you on condition that this process that needs to be done is done correctly. Is that my understanding?
Correct.
So what happens then? Let's say 18 months comes and the process is not complete and things aren't done. Has the clearing committee, the clearinghouse rather, did they discuss what does this mean then for this access that the president is talking about in his statement?
No, we did not discuss that in the clearinghouse because it's not up to the clearinghouse. It's up to Minister Gwahube to determine how long that takes to do it properly and according to the law.
But ultimately, it may not be up to the clearinghouse, but up to her. But these are political parties who hold different views on this particular matter. So if it does happen that she reaches that point and you're not happy, you are not going to be silent. So it means that we may find ourselves here again.
Well, we may certainly find ourselves here again on any specific day, but the president has seen fit to trust Sibiwe Gwahube to put together those regulations, those norms and standards, and to make sure that she finishes them in a reasonable time frame. And we have a lot of confidence in Sibiwe Gwahube to do that.
So what do we learn from Helen Zille's reaction? The first thing is that, like I said, body language does tell you a lot. When you watch that particular clip, you can tell Helen is sullen. She's dejected. Her body is giving all of the indicators of defeat, right? She understands that they lost the fight and that all of their bluffs or all of their cards have been called by the ANC, if you will. And in this particular round of the poker game, they don't have enough. They actually lose all of their chips in this particular instance. She understands, and you can tell that in as much as she's trying to put up a brave face, it is not a victorious or jubilant Helen Zille. You look at Panyaza Lesufi and his body language and his response, you can tell that he is, an emboldened lion, a victorious lion, and Helen is a dejected leader at this particular point, a defeated chess player, if you will, at this particular point. Her answers, in essence, are what is known in public relations as spinning. Spinning is basically, and Helen Zille has got a long history, not only in journalism, communications, but also political communications. So she's not only journalist, but somebody who has written books, etc. So she understands how to play the game at the highest level. You can't take that away from her. So what people do when they've lost a fight in politics is you will very rarely hear politicians say, no, we lost, we took an L, or anything like that. What they'll do is they'll spin. They'll say, but if you look at this particular thing, and if you slant the lens in a particular way, but in the dissection, we don't have time for that. What we do is we look at the empirical information and we try to make an ascertainment on the basis of the hard facts, not the emotional facts. The reality is, the talk about norms and standards, and there's still a lot of time and we can still leave at a later stage, that is all spin. Norms and standards were never the contention. The contention was the text of the particular legislation, right? They did not support the bill, and they took a lot of steps trying to prevent these particular provisions from ever making the light of day. And their biggest victory was even getting the 3 months concession to begin with. But her answer is spinning. They lost this particular fight, and they lost the fight badly. They've been basically outsmarted and circumvented by the ANC in this, even though President Ramaphosa gave them a little bit that they can talk about as a way out, or as strep cell, if you will, for the DA constituency and the parents and all of the people who are concerned. Because they're basically saying, while your kid is in high school, to the parents whose kids are in high school right now, you don't have to worry about this. This doesn't affect your kids. Don't worry. And it is what it is, right? So that's what they're saying. The other thing is that the Democratic Alliance overplayed their hand, and they actually made it very hard for President Ramaphosa to give them anything that they want. How do they overplay their hand? First thing that they did was that the Minister of Basic Education boycotted the signing of the bill. That was very disrespectful, a very high level of delela. It was a very high level of delela. It's not done. You understand, when you're dealing with these African presidents, African leaders, they are coming from very cultural backgrounds where their seniority and their status, and even within the ANC politics, you have to maintain a certain level of decorum, etc., etc. You know, you can't just rock up to the president and say, "Hey, Cyril," even though he sometimes has, that kind of language to try to connect with him. You have to go there and be respectful of the man, his status, his accomplishments, his credentials, right? So you have to be respectful. So for a young minister to miss a critical signing of a bill by her boss, that was something that was taken by the ANC and also by President Ramaphosa as really a red flag, if you will, and a massive sign of disrespect. President Ramaphosa doesn't like disrespect. He is very sensitive about those type of things, even though he hides it, because he often, when he speaks, he's very calm, collected, and, jovial, but he doesn't like those type of things. And you can see how he responds to those type of things over time, and you'll understand that he's not somebody who takes disrespect lightly. But the DA overplayed their hand by first doing that. Then secondly, John Steenhuisen went with Afriforum, DA, and others. Sorry, not Afriforum. Yes, Afriforum, but not DA, because he's DA. John Steenhuisen, Afriforum, Solidarity, a lot of other unions, organizations, Afrikaner community support groups went to the Footrekker Monument to actually say, we are opposed to this, and to show the president that they've got numbers, they've got force, they've got power. I don't know how they thought that would work, because if, let's say, he had said, okay, we're scrapping those provisions on his side, what was the public going to say, right? The public that is ANC supporters, EFF supporters, MK supporters, the public that supports more inclusion in these public schools that are former Model C schools. What was the global community going to say about his authority in his administration? He's the president. He's supposed to preside, to be in charge, right? Buck stops with him. So if powerful people can go to a monument and actually just show numbers and then say, do it or else, or don't do it or else. And he says, these guys don't want me to do this thing. What was that going to say about his authority? So by trying to challenge his authority in these very public ways, they made it very difficult for him to give them any room to move, even if he wanted to. But I don't think that he wanted to in any case. I think that he's already made the calculations around whether or not he wants these acts and bills to be implemented. He wants them to be part of his legacy. Because aside from these last acts that he signed, there isn't a lot that is going to be able to be put onto the scoreboard on the positive side of his legacy. And he wants these things, even if they're not going to necessarily be implemented fairly. He's properly at the beginning. His calculation is that in 20 years, 30 years' time, people will praise these acts, and the signing of these acts as acts of courage, almost in the way that LBJ was praised for signing the Civil Rights Act in America, right? So they overplayed his hand. And then the other way that they overplayed their hand, not his hand, their hand, is that they kept making threats to leave the GNU. We're going to leave. If this thing is implemented, we're going to leave, etc. If you keep making threats like that, right, and you put someone into a corner, right, if they make a calculation that, look, you don't have the chutzpah, you don't have the necessary conditions on the ground to leave, they're going to call your bluff. And then you're going to look like the boy who cried wolf, or in this case, the John who cried doomsday coalition, right? They overplayed their hand and they're not going to leave. And you can tell from Helen Zille's language that they're not going to leave. They're going to stay in this coalition till 2027, the way I see it. 2027, December, is when the ANC will have its elective conference. Then all bets are off. And the ANC is going to try to implement and pass everything that they need to before the elective conference, because there's an understanding by all that after the conference, the balance of power shifts within the ANC in ways that you can't control. The Ramaphosa administration understands this. Those who are waiting to take over within the ANC understand this. Everybody understands that local government will be a test to see whether or not Panyaza and Paul Mashatile have got enough momentum and traction. If they lose too many seats, they may not be able to win conference. But if they hold the seats, and they're trying to do so by closing spaza shops, all of these things, these nationalistic policies that they are pushing are an attempt to try to grow the ANC again in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. And the spaza shops issue is one of the issues that they've chosen as a plan to do that, right? It's one of the reasons why they like that particular fight, because even if sometimes you're not delivering on water, etc., you can still blame the foreign nationals, you blame the outsiders, and you say, oh, well, there's no water, but it's because we've got all of these Zimbabweans and Mozambique guys in the country, but we're closing down spaza shops, we're dealing with this issue, we've got community wardens, etc. And when you go very tough on immigration, that can help you win elections. Ask Donald Trump, he'll tell you. So that's the calculation Panyaza are making. They know that they can't fix everything, but maybe they'll be able to win if they can really get into the into the right discourse and pockets within particular areas on immigration, right? So that's the play. So as things stand, right? As things stand right now, the DA is not going to leave the coalition. That's the long and short of it. They're not going to leave the coalition. They're going to stay in the coalition till 2027. They overplayed their hand. They're not leaving. But there's still another big fight, and they may try to change strategy because this approach has failed. So you must understand, the next fight is around national health insurance. This is a fight about a fund. National health insurance is in effect a fund. It's an act regulating a fund. The aim of the act is fundamentally that there will be no medical aid at the end of it, and that all of the monies in those medical aid funds will then also be in this NHI fund. And this is what the fight is about. It's about that large pool of money that currently exists, and it's going to be a big fight. It's going to be a big fight. Why am I mentioning the size of the money? Because what's going to happen now is management consultants are going to meet, healthcare consultants are going to meet, lobbyists are going to meet, strategists are going to meet, Adrian Gore, all of the other leaders within health insurance are going to meet, and they're going to look at all of the mistakes that were made in this fight around the BELA Act, and they're going to come up with a new strategy. And that strategy is going to include communications through ENCA, News 24, Business Live, all of those publications. That strategy is going to include how healthcare issues are covered and how to put those issues in a way that really public sentiment shifts away from the government. They're going to fight a different fight, and we're all going to see how that fight plays out. But even the DA, which will play a role because the DA also opposes NHI, will change how they fight the fight. Obviously, they don't have health as a ministry in the first instance, but they're not going to be able to do what they did here and expect to beat the ANC. So they're going back to the drawing board. They're not leaving the government of national unity, but they are going back to the drawing board. The Panyaza Lesufi and Paul Mashatile side of the ANC is going to bed very happy tonight. They won this fight. I don't know what you guys think, though. Let's have a conversation. Till the next one.